When Gretchen introduced me earlier, she mentioned that I happen to have served our congregation in Honolulu, the First Unitarian Church of Honolulu. I lived in Hawaii for a total of 8 years, and I'd like to add to that so far, because I do want to someday hopefully retire there. And when I was living there, I was hana'ed or adopted by a fellow colleague and friend of mine, the late Reverend Keikapa Lee was his name. So he named me after his tutukane, or grandfather, his paternal grandfather. And the name that was given to me was Pono. Now, Pono means righteousness. And that I could live with, because it's also a synonym for justice. The word ku, however, and he taught me how to pronounce it, not this soft kukupachu kind of ku, but rather a very strong ku, because ku is the god of war in Hawaiian mythology. And that made me question that name, because I thought, oh my gosh, I consider myself to be a somewhat pacifist and nonviolent person. Why would I be given such a violent name as to the god of war? So I talked to my spiritual coach about it, and she said, well, one doesn't necessarily need to view it in that light. One could view it as one who struggles for justice. And suddenly, that made a lot more sense to me. After all, I was reminded that the state seal of the great state of Hawaii still says, "Ua mau ke eka oka aina ika pono," which means the life of the land is perpetuated in righteousness. So again, there appears this word pono. Would you mind saying that with me? Pono. Again, it has traditionally been interpreted as righteousness, and we could see that that theme is also present in the opening hymn we just sang. We'll build a land where we bind up the broken. We'll build the land where the captives go free. And the chorus says, come build a land where sisters and brothers anointed by God may then create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters and peace like an ever-flowing stream, which does indeed come from Amos 5:24. And this, again, the word peace, however, in Amos could also be interpreted as righteousness. So righteousness flowing down like an ever-flowing stream. What does this word righteousness mean? And again, I feel like over the years it has been misinterpreted. Adam Grant wrote a book called Think Again, which again Gretchen read to us earlier today. And in it, he claims that oftentimes, especially in a polarized society like we have in America, righteousness usually means that I'm right and you're wrong. And there seems to be this sense of overconfidence that we're the only ones who possess the truth, and we're the only ones who have access to what is right and what is true. Now, this overconfidence, one could just blame those who are on the other side of the religious and political spectrum than we do, right? Of course, we as Unitarian Universalists are somehow immune to that kind of mentality, right? Because after all, we could think whatever we want and believe whatever we want. Is that right? And over the years, I don't know about you, but I've encountered many UUs. I've been to many public witnessing events, and sometimes while we're wearing those bright yellow T-shirts that say "Side with Love," we could somehow fall into the trap of self-righteousness. That somehow us being right makes us holier than thou. that it creates a sense of exceptionalism, that we have evolved in our theological thinking and our understanding of what social justice means, that we are somehow better than those people, those evangelicals, those conservatives, those fundamentalist Christians, or fundamentalist whatever, that we somehow are the exception to the rule, and that we are justified in our righteous indignation, that whenever we see people being oppressed, that we have a right to get angry about it, or even that if we don't get our way, that we have a right to become upset. I'm not saying that's wrong or that's right, but I'm saying that I've witnessed it with other Unitarian Universalists, and I've witnessed it within myself. And this is why Adam, if I could be so bold as to use his first name, Mr. Grant, in his book, says that there are 3 vocations that begin with the letter P that falls into the danger zone of wanting to be right. The first P are politicians. And according to Adam, politicians are the folks who say we campaign and lobby for the approval of our constituents. And the second group of people are prosecutors. They're the ones who recognize the flaws in either people's reasoning to prove them wrong, or in order to win our case. That's what we need to do, is to become a prosecutor, right? And guess what the third category is? Preacher. That's right. And so I had to take a hard look in the mirror for this one. The preachers are the ones who deliver sermons to protect and promote our ideals. And I've known many a colleague, and again, I include myself in this category sometimes, where I feel so strongly about what I believe in that I use sermons as a vehicle to protect and promote our ideals. I love the sign that is outside of one of my colleagues' doors. It says, "Think for yourself, your minister could be wrong." And I'd like an addendum to that. Rethink what you thought for yourself, because you could be wrong. Right? All of us could be wrong at some point or another. And the question is, how much rethinking do we need to do? Again, according to Adam Grant, a key question here is how much rethinking is necessary. Although the sweet spot will always vary from one person and situation to the next, the average gives us a clue. A few years into their tournaments, typical competitors updated their predictions about twice per question. The super forecasters updated their predictions more than 4 times per question. Rethink for yourself and think for yourself. Now, at this point, you may be saying to me, Reverend Jonipher, that's my definition of an indecisive, wishy-washy person. You know, I'd hate to think that I'm wrong all the time, or I'm even wrong 3 out of the 4 times that I have to rethink any given situation. And besides, I don't even like being wrong. But let's think about that statement for a little bit, shall we? I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but how many of you have been wrong this past week or even this past year? Again, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, so I appreciate the honesty, those of you who did. But if you haven't, if you claim that you've never been wrong, then I question whether you've actually learned and grown within the past week or past year, right? Because ideally, it is through the mistakes and the wrong that we do that actually compels us to grow and learn something new. So what Adam Grant suggests is that instead of thinking like a politician or a prosecutor or a preacher, think like a scientist. If you're already a scientist, then that should be fairly easy for you to do. Because as you may know, all you need to do is come up with a hypothesis, knowing that at some point that hypothesis could be proven to be true, or sometimes it could be proven to be false. But if it is false, then you just start all over and again, come up with a different hypothesis at some point based on the truth that you've learned and move on from there, right? That making a mistake is not the end of the world for a scientist, because even disproving something, it becomes valuable data for the future. And the second thing that I think Adam Grant advises us in his book is to learn how to be humble. Again, in the Hawaiian tradition, the word for humble is ha'a ha'a. I know it sounds like I'm laughing at you, ha ha, but that's not what being humble means, right? Being humble means that we don't get trapped into dualistic either-or kind of thinking, like I'm right, you're wrong, this is good, this is bad. But rather, we draw out the complexity of things, because life is indeed complex, isn't it? Can I get an amen to that? One person said amen. All right, I envy those of you who live a simple life, because I feel like every single day I wake up, it's not just a black and white world that I'm living into, that I'm moving around with, but rather a very complex, different shades of gray kind of world, that even something as simple as justice or peace, for example, could be so complex, because we often think that peace is the absence of war or conflict, but it really isn't. In my mind, peace is being able to figure out how to hold both things to be true. Now, what do I mean by this? And again, I want to draw the distinction between different kinds of conflict. There's the emotional or the task conflict that Adam Grant writes about, and there's the emotional or relational conflict. So opinion or task conflict on the one hand, and emotional or relational conflict on the other. Now, I think when we think about conflict that really matters, where the stakes are high, perhaps describes what emotional and relational conflict is. And I think that's the conflict that we're more fearful about. But opinion or task conflicts, and this must not happen at All Souls, but I've witnessed it in other UU congregations before. Literally, I've heard congregants complain about whether to have 1-ply or 2-ply toilet paper in the bathroom, all right? Or what color paint to paint the sanctuary. Like, those are opinion or task kind of conflicts that are not really affecting the mission, but rather have to do with people's personal preferences. Relational conflicts are the ones that could tear a congregation apart. So whenever those instances happen, what I usually encourage folks to do is go back into our covenant. What did we promise each other that we were going to do as a religious community to hold each other in care and to stay at the table whenever we have those difficult moments, whenever conflict may arise? So instead of righteousness and being so certain about our opinion, can we instead focus on right relationship and coming back into covenant with one another? And in order to do so, can we take a look at our shared principles and our shared values of what makes us Unitarian Universalists to begin with? Now, in order to do so, I suggest that we do an upgrade, because how many of you have heard of the Golden Rule? In fact, Okay, good. I'm glad many of you have, because it's certainly present in almost every single world religion out there. You know, we have them in our religious education classes, right, of the different ways of stating, do unto others what you would have them do unto you. How many of you, however, have heard of the platinum rule? Only one of you or two of you. So this is an upgrade, and everybody loves an upgrade, right? Especially when they're on a plane. So this is an upgrade to the golden rule. And the platinum rule says, do unto others what they would have done unto themselves. Now, how do you find out what others would want done unto themselves? One way is to make assumptions. But we know what assume stands for. It's making a bleep out of you and me, right? It's the synonym for donkey, by the way, in the King James Version of the Bible, in case you wanted to know what the bleep stood for. But that doesn't necessarily get at it. So the platinum rule and doing unto others requires a conversation, and it requires good listening skills in terms of, so how would you like it to be done unto you? Because the way I prefer it may not be the way that you prefer it. And this is what's beautiful about being in community together, because we do have diverse perspectives here and so many different ways that we could go about doing it. And it places relationships first, and it places kindness and compassion first, rather than being right all the time. Rethinking, according to Adam Grant, liberates us to do more than update our knowledge and opinions. It leads to a more fulfilling life. When we are in right relationship with each other, we could do no wrong. We can't go wrong with that, right? Which is why I want to end with another Hawaiian saying that usually people end their signatures with, or their emails with. And it's the word malama pono. Can you say that with me? Malama pono. Malama means to care. And so loosely translated, it could mean take care, see ya. Or it could mean, I should say, if you add the word pono to it, take care of our relationship is what that means. So what you're greeting each other with as you go forth is that I want to remain in right relationship with you, because that is important to me. And that's what we need to care for each other, moving forward. So I'm going to end with that, just simply with the words, malama pono. Take care of our relationships. Amen? Amen. And now I invite you to please rise in body or in spirit as you're willing and able, and join me in singing hymn number 318, We Would Be One.